Good afternoon. Off the top, I want to express my thoughts to Peter MATERA and his family today. Peter, who was a legend of mine when I was growing up, I loved him watching him play for the Eagles, suffered a heart attack on Sunday or Monday morning. His wife assisted. He was taken, Peter, to Bendigo, where he's had 2 stents placed in his heart and seems to have gone all right so far. In fact, Phil, his brother, giving an update on Perth radio this morning, saying thankfully that Peter's up and about and feeling much better today and hoping to get out of the ICU. So hopefully that turns into a positive story. Peter MATERA, the West Coast great and I guess legend, suffering a heart attack here in Victoria near the New South Wales border over the last couple of days. Our thoughts with him. Now, in terms of some big stories I want to cover, obviously the Bombers, a big story overnight. I want to talk about what they've proposed in terms of this review and break down what it means for the club. I'll also give you some news nuggets, the latest on Jacob Weitering, the mid-season draft, a couple of clubs there, Collingwood and Hawthorn. I'll tell you what specific players they're looking at, a couple of surprise packets there as well. Buddy, he's appealing. I'll get to that. I'll give you a new name in the CEO search the AFL's conducting. Caroline Wilson mentioned this name last night, and I'll tell you why it's got some, genuine legs in terms of a discussion point. Want to discuss that. Alastair Clarkson's also thrown up a form of private ownership for the Tasmanian team. I flagged that on this podcast last week. Want to go into some of the details on that and why it might not work. Anyway, off the top now, Essendon, a big story. They lost to Port on the weekend by 16 points. They lost to Richmond the week before by 32 points. They've been playing more competitive football since there were calls for some type of football review. 2 weeks later, after saying they wouldn't do one, they're doing one. This was Paul Brasher addressing the Essendon members on a video message late yesterday afternoon.
So, we're currently examining every aspect of our football program. Sean Wellman, who is our football director, is overseeing that on behalf of the board. He has got a couple of pretty good football minds alongside him in terms of Kevin Sheedy and Simon Madden, who he can call upon at any stage. And as I say, we are looking at every element of the football program. The actions that come out of this review are likely to be incremental in terms of additional resources rather than transformational. Over coming weeks, we'll get back some very experienced players. We'll get back people like Stringer, Langford, Snelling, Stewart, all of those sorts of guys who between them have probably played 450 games or so will be coming back into the side.
It's a 9-minute video, but for Bombers fans, what does it all mean? It means, according to Brasher, they're not where they want to be. They made the 8 last year. They didn't necessarily expect to do that. They're up and about, but it's been challenging this year. They're now 2-9. Their effort is not enough. Nobody's happy. They don't want to have honourable losses. They're happy that they're showing some more effort. But effort alone is not enough. They don't want to be known as a team that, they showed effort. That was a good effort. They want to actually win games. That's all logical. The priority areas, Brasher explained, that's their chairman, Paul Brasher, is the player development, the support for the coaches, including Ben Rutten, and their recruiting and list management. They've got salary cap space and key picks. They'll clearly have a good pick in the draft this year. They want to maximise any decisions they can make to get better outcomes there. So they've called a review of sorts. Sean Wellman, the football director, will conduct the review. So it's not internal in that instance, but obviously they've backed Wellman in to do that. Look, Essendon did do a review 2 years ago, and they made the finals last year. They're now 2-9. So effectively they're doing a second review in the space of a fairly short period of time. Is it a good idea? Well, everyone will have their own views. I think it's logical. I mean, they're always doing this work anyway. Wellman and his team, guys like Kevin Sheedy and Josh Marnie, the football boss, they're obviously looking to improve and don't want to wait until the end of the year. They want to get in the front foot and see if they can resource areas better and make some decisions sooner. So I think it makes a lot of logical sense. It's the logical next move. You can debate whether they should have announced it a couple of weeks ago, the timing of the announcement, how they announced it, all the rest of it. I guess it's a good idea. Should it be external? Well, people are employed at football clubs and put into positions on boards at football clubs to make decisions. So if they think the right people are there to make these decisions, in this instance, Sean Wellman, I guess it doesn't need to be independent. Jeff Walsh was an independent component of Carlton's review last year, and you have to say that was spectacularly successful so far. So I think there's arguments both ways there. And in terms of, the ambit of the review, I did notice, or the scope of the review, I did notice that Paul Brasher said it'll be incremental change rather than, massive change. I guess that limits the results and scopes of the review before you've even started. But having said that, they've obviously done some work to date and sort of determined that's all they want to do at this stage. They're not going to turf the footy boss or turf the coach or turf the recruiting boss just yet. They obviously want to look at just, a few steps before they get to that stage. Just in terms of Ben Rutten's support, they've obviously determined already they want to get behind the truck, which is obviously their decision. It's interesting. Maybe an independent review would say something more controversial, like with Alistair Clarkson in the market. They are duty bound to at least explore him. But it seems like Essendon at the moment very much firmly behind the truck and the additional resources that he needs. Paul Brasher also spoke about the controversial, well, not controversial, but there was some controversy externally regarding the extension of CEO Xavier Campbell's contract. And this is what he had to say to the Essendon members.
The second thing that I wanted to cover is the extension of Xavier Campbell's contract as our CEO by a further 2 years. And I should say at the outset, I've had one or two people say to me they thought it was inappropriate they should read about this in the paper before the club informed them and question whether we were trying to pull some sort of swift one. To the second question, the answer is absolutely no, but I should apologise for the fact that you didn't hear it from us first.
There you go, backing Xavier Campbell and apologising for not, releasing that information in a more transparent form sooner. I'll leave you with the Bombers one this morning. And I'll just leave you with the Bombers nugget. I've reported that the chairman, Paul Brasher, as per his maximum term, and he's highly regarded, Paul Brasher, very professional, as you can hear from that video there. He'll step down as per his maximum term towards the end of next year. A new president that's widely being touted, according to my sources, is the current vice president of the Bombers, a guy called Peter Allen, who was previously the chief financial officer of Westfield on a global scale. Obviously, well regarded by the likes of the Lowies and those types of things. He, I understand, would be highly suitable to take over as the Essendon president post-Brasher. That'll be later next year, but just one for your radar. Some news nuggets. Just want to whip through some news this afternoon. Jacob Weitering had surgery this morning on his AC joint in his shoulder. That's sort of consistent with what we discussed yesterday. Useful precedents for that are obviously Hunter, Clark and Steele at St Kilda, who with good going are about 7 weeks. I think Carlton's touting 6 weeks. Look, good luck to Jacob, but I think 6 weeks seems a bit optimistic. Anyway, he's on the track to recovery because he's now had surgery on that AC joint. The mid-season draft tomorrow. Collingwood's looking at a Williamstown player called Callan Dawson, who's a well-regarded defender. It makes sense because Jordan Roughead retired last week after his bad shoulder injury. Dawson's 194 centimetres, suffered an ankle injury on the weekend, which could worry maybe some clubs. I'm told that ankle's okay. We'll find out for sure tomorrow. He's a Sparky, so it'd be a good story being a full-time Sparky and then going on to the Pies list. The mid-season draft, sort of the stuff of dreams in that regard. Hawthorn made inquiries on Williamstown ruckman Tom Downey yesterday. He's a former Giant who is 29 years old these days. There was some surprise when Downey nominated for the mid-season draft. Perhaps that might explain it. Hawthorn making some inquiries, I understand, on Downey yesterday. Buddy is appealing at the tribunal tonight. It's interesting. I think at Richmond, they're a bit bemused that Pickett, for a bump, got a week. Buddy copped a week for something far more blatant, and he's appealing. I mean, what's a worse look? Pickett, laid what some people think was a fair bump. Buddy sort of whacked Cochin. Anyway, that's an unofficial view from one person I spoke to at Richmond, certainly not the official view of the club. Cochin, I understand, is not appearing at the Buddy hearing tonight. I thought perhaps Koch might get up and say he exaggerated or something like that. Look, that's not happening, is my understanding at this stage. It will be interesting to see Buddy's argument. He'll probably argue it was careless rather than intentional. We'll find out tonight because, of course, the Swans, I think footy fans, are keen to see Buddy take on Melbourne this weekend. Having said that, he's got to get past the tribunal first and try and get this 1 week quashed. The AFL CEO search is going on in the background. Presidents have been speaking to the recruiter. It's a New York firm, but it's a recruiter that's here, and that recruiter has obviously been available for the presidents to speak to. I think that was encouraged by the AFL chairman, Richard Goyder, that the presidents could get in touch and share their views with the recruiter. There's all sorts of names being bandied about. I've mentioned on Friday that Brendan Gale certainly has some support in terms of an external AFL candidate. That's outside the AFL, but obviously in clubland. I think some clubs are very keen for the person to have club experience that replaces Gill, and there's certainly a view from some of the clubs that I speak to that they should look outside the AFL for the candidate, and the candidate isn't currently at the AFL. Anyway, that's a discussion. An interesting name thrown up last night, who I have mentioned before, but Caroline Wilson mentioned it on Footy Classified last night, is Tom Harley. Tom's obviously the former Geelong champion who now runs the Sydney Football Club. There's certainly a degree of support from some clubs for Tom to get that job. So that's an interesting discussion point over the next couple of months. He's certainly got huge charisma, a lot of club experience, the player experience, and could really grow into that job. So it'll be interesting to see how serious that gets towards the sharp end. But Tom Harley certainly being touted now as a potential replacement for Gil McLachlan. And just finally on Tasmania, our loyal listeners will think I crap on about Tasmania a lot. I'm very interested in the topic. I might move down there soon at this rate, but I think it's an interesting topic. I flagged the idea of private ownership at the consortium looking at that last week on this podcast. Caroline Wilson had further detail on Footy Classified last night, explaining in summary that Clarko, Alistair Clarkson, had presented to the AFL on this very topic, a model similar to Green Bay. The impression I had from Caro's report, and I'm paraphrasing here, is the idea based from Clarko would be that there'd be lots of small owners who Hutchie commented as sort of sounds a bit like members who would contribute to the model. Look, I've asked to speak to Clarko and I'll endeavour to speak to him over the next week or so on this topic to get some more details. Just from the limited information last night, I'd be surprised if that's workable because it doesn't solve the major issue, which is the fact that the clubs don't want exposure beyond the Tasmanian government guarantee, i.e. they don't want to be carrying the can for the costs or estimated losses going forward beyond when the government guarantee it, i.e. in 10 years. And I don't think small shareholders would have the money to take on that exposure or probably aren't willing to take on that exposure, and that wouldn't necessarily appease the club. So I'll try and find out further information from Clarko. I'm not dissing the idea of private ownership, but if it's a whole bunch of small shareholders, I doubt that's going to solve the other clubs' concern over being protected going forward from a private owner in terms of the potential losses. So that's going to be an interesting discussion point, and I'll endeavour to talk about that further with Clarko. Just to explain by way of background there, and I'm sure you already know this, 2/3 of the clubs, in essence, need to approve the Tasmanian approval for a dedicated team. The AFL said they'll only do it with the majority of clubs' support. So that's why in the background there's a lot of jockeying going on at the moment for Tasmania, if you like, and the AFL, who are supportive of a dedicated team to try and woo the existing clubs. A lot of them are worried, including Sydney, that the competition can't necessarily afford a dedicated team, and there is a real discussion in the background from some clubs about whether North should do a partnership with Tasmania. Clearly North don't want to. The AFL's not forcing North to do that, but there, as I mentioned yesterday, there's a push from some clubs to say, well, maybe it's up to the Commission to make a tough decision. Interesting one, and a fairly divisive discussion. Anyway, I'll be back on Thursday for all the latest footy news. A big week, as I mentioned. Thoughts with Peter MATERA. Essendon's review is interesting, to say the least. Let's hope it works. I'll be back on Thursday. Triple M rocks football.
That was Tom Browne's news. Come back every Monday, Thursday and Friday for more, and subscribe to Triple M Footy on Listener or wherever you listen to get all our podcasts throughout the season. For Ream Hot Water and McDonald's, Triple M rocks footy.